Now, as you know, in years past, we've always used this second evening, Tuesday evening, to discuss the state of the Southern Baptist Convention. And there's going to be a little of that tonight. One way it'll be changed to some extent is Mark and I have just been in a series of conversations with pastors. It even happened last week, but over the last year or 2 years, we find we're in groups of pastors where they're asking us the question, hey, what do you guys think the point of a denomination is, and should we be involved in this denomination? When do you know it's time to leave a denomination? How should we think through these things? And so we thought it'd be good to use this evening to maybe change the conversation slightly, get a bunch of local church pastors to have this question about the utility of denominations, as well as how we feel like the SBC is going along with that. Other associations as well, and that's where I think, well, we have a number of brothers, most of whom are involved in more than just one thing, and I hope those things can come out as well. We have Omar Johnson, pastor of Temple Hills Baptist Church in Temple Hills, Maryland. Matt Chandler, pastor of the Village Church in Flower Mound, Texas. Aaron Menikoff, pastor of Mount Vernon Baptist Church in Atlanta, GA. And of course, Dr. Danny Akin, president of Southeastern Baptist Theological Seminary. Brothers, thank you all for being with us. And Mark Dever, pastor of Capitol Hill Baptist Church.
And John Leeman is an elder at Cheverly Baptist Church in Cheverly, Maryland, not too far from Temple Hills.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Okay, guys, so we're thinking about denominations. Why be a part of a denomination?
Yeah, and the way I thought it would be good to get the conversation going to be helpful is all of us are committed to pastoring our local churches. I know you three well, and Danny, you're all about trying to help pastors do that.
I'm a teaching pastor at my church as well. I usually do Wednesday nights and have done so for 18 years.
Wonderful. So in order to do what the Lord is calling us to do, 1 Peter 5, as under shepherds in our local congregations, why do we need anything outside the local church? None of us believe that there is a presbytery or a bishop above us that we have to obey. But in your own work, in the calling the Lord's given you, in your congregation, what do you find you run into that you can't really pursue for the health of the church the way you want to without, or at least is greatly helped by, some wider outside association? And I'd like all of you to comment, including Danny, you, and John.
Well, and you should answer this as well.
Well, I'll go last. Yeah, brothers?
Yeah, I'll hop in. I think the thing that we have needed to partner with other churches to accomplish primarily has been working to reach the unreached across the world. No matter how big TBC got or how much money we had, we needed help to get to those places in a healthy way and seek to reach the completely unreached. And so we're a part of 100. We've got 8 or 9 churches that have come together, and our goal is in our run, however long that is, to see 100 unreached peoples reached. But that takes a lot of cooperation, and it takes setting up certain things and being able to fund that a certain way, and to get subject matter experts who know how to navigate those kinds of places. And so that was a primary thrust for us in partnering with other churches, is how do you reach the unreached? And then there are things that the village lacks the expertise to pull off. Like you desperately need a Wycliffe translating the Bible into other languages. I love my staff, they're amazing, but we can't just walk into a tribe and pick up a dialect and then, figure out how to write it down for the first time in human history and then put it together a Bible for them. So we need those kinds of connections that help us seek to fulfill the Great Commission.
Matt, you got to hold your mic right up to your mouth.
Okay, like right here.
Exactly.
Okay, I can do that.
Excellent. So Matt, what percentage of your missions budget is going through Acts 29?
Almost all of our church planning and global missions goes through Acts 29 now.
Okay, and so how does that help you as a church?
Well, that's what I'm saying. Those cooperations with those churches, both stateside and globally, like all of our trainings to go into the unreached are through Acts 29 churches in Beirut, in Dubai, setting up one in Taiwan right now. And the guys that are in this cooperative, the churches that are in this cooperative, we will all have kind of residencies at our churches. And then if we're heading into the Middle East, then we're going to send you to Beirut, and you're going to live in Beirut for a year or two in an Acts 29 church there. You're going to be trained up in that way, and then you'll jump from there into the people group that we're after.
And when you call something an Acts 29 church, it's not necessarily germinated through Acts 29. It may be, but it may have been just another church that you all start cooperating with.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Omar, what are you guys finding?
Yeah, for us, it's, I think, encouragement from other pastors and churches nearby. We're a smaller church, 60 members. And so for us, it's also equipping, resources, and money. When I came back to the church to pastor 3 years ago, they didn't have enough resource to pay me to pay a salary. And so several other churches in our area and in other areas of the U.S. partnered together to bring me back to pastor that church and continue to give money to support it. So in some communities where there's either not enough money in that local church or the neighborhood doesn't have enough resource to have several good gospel churches that are self-sustaining, it's great to have other churches partner with existing churches. And I think a lot of money, excitement goes into church planting or church revitalization. But the New Testament also has this heavy category for strengthening existing churches. And so to see churches partner together with other churches to strengthen existing churches to help good gospel work, we benefited from that.
Okay, so Omar, we've mentioned Acts 29, certainly the Southern Baptist Convention. Has there been a group of churches, or how do you find that kind of help? Because there may be brothers sitting here who are in similar situations wondering like, wow, I don't have those personal relationships. What can I do to find that kind of help?
Local Pastors Association. So you have started the CBMA years ago. We're part of that.
Pause, let me just explain that. So
yeah.
the Columbia Baptist Ministers Association. It has no legal existence, but the first Tuesday of every month, Omar, me, and like 20 or 30 or 40 other pastors will meet at our church, and for 2 hours we will share, talk, pray about matters, just hearing from the churches what's going on. So if you have ever been to a CBMA meeting, please stand up. Just stand. And I'm only asking you to do that so that at a break or when you're done, if you want to talk to somebody, these guys who are standing up can tell you what it's like. Thanks. You can be seated.
And pause on Omar for a second. Mark, I do think it's slightly instructive for you to explain why you started that. 30 seconds on why you started that, because what you found when you got to D.C. might help others.
We tried to get involved with the D.C. Baptist Convention 7 years, 7 years of hard labor, 7 years of smashing our heads against the wall, 7 years of people who believed abortion was great, who didn't believe in the inerrancy of the Bible, mocked people who would evangelize Mormons, and that was in the state newspaper. And so we finally just decided, all right, we've done everything we can. This is not going to be like the SBC turnaround in the 80s and 90s, because in the SBC turnaround, the churches actually believed the Bible. It was a matter of some people at the middle and some entities that didn't. And so you could just sort of pop them off. But it didn't work with the DCBC, because with the DCBC, you actually had churches that didn't believe the Bible was true.
You were one of the few conservative churches.
Yeah. And so we just decided, okay, let's just find Southern Baptist churches, and let's just take the senior pastor, so the guy whoever's doing the preaching each week, and they like 9Marks. So there's a basic agreement on philosophy of ministry. And let's just give them an invitation to get together for lunch, 11:30 to 1:30, first Tuesday of each month. And it's developed a deep series of relationships, and Omar has been a part of that in his church, and it's been a joy to have him.
Did you say how that's been useful to you, Omar, the CBMA?
One has been encouragement. So
brand new pastor, like first year or two.
Yeah. What'd you say?
How it's been useful for you as a new pastor?
Yeah, new pastor, year one, year two, a lot of trials, and to be able to go to a monthly meeting and steal ideas and what others are doing, and then year one, year two, to hear all the things you're going through, and then to hear 30 other brothers who are going through 30 things worse than you, you're encouraged, right, to keep going, right? So, yeah.
I had a pastor one time down in North Carolina who was going through a hard time, and he was telling me about it on the phone, and I paused for a moment, and I said, actually, last summer, this was in 2002, last summer, I had about a whole bunch of members leave our church very angry at me, and 6 or 7 or 8 of them wrote these really long, nasty letters, and I kept them all in a file folder. I said, would you like me to send you copies of those? And he sort of paused for a minute. You could tell there was embarrassment on the line. And he said, Yeah, if you don't mind, I'd appreciate it. So I photocopied them, and these were all snail mail letters, and I mailed them to him. About a week later, I get a call from him, and I said, so how were the letters? He said, well, I'm kind of embarrassed to say, but it's like one of the best things I've ever read in my life. You know, I thought I was Satan incarnate the way people are talking, and I realized you're worse than I am, you know. Anyway, there's something about pastors sharing miseries together that the Lord really uses to help. Aaron?
Yeah, I don't think we need denominations or parachurch ministries. I think
You've started like 4 of them.
No, but I think we need relationships. Yeah. It's like if I want to go from Atlanta to New York, I just need my legs. It's going to take a long time, and I love a car, but I don't need a car. If you read the Bible, it's kind of like you talk about discipling. Christians should just disciple. You read the Bible, Jonathan's written a lot about this. Churches should just know one another. When Paul would visit a church, he would say, hey, all these churches here send you greetings. They knew them. When Antioch was a brand new church and without a lot of spiritual leadership, Jerusalem said, hey, we're rich in personnel. And so they send Barnabas. And then when Jerusalem is struggling, Antioch sends relief. At that time, there was no structure. They just used their relational legs. And so denominations are great, like cars are great. I love them. They can help you do a lot of things like get to the nations a lot faster. But they are fundamentally unnecessary.
I want to come back with some more of the structures you've started. But Kevin Smith is here. A lot of us will know Kevin. Kevin's taught, he's preached, he's pastored. And for 4 years, how long were you in Maryland? 5.5 years. Kevin was actually giving his time to run a state convention. So Kevin, just talk for a moment about how that structure could be helpful for pastors here.
The state convention in Southern Baptist life, I think, is one of the easiest ways
bring that right up to your mouth.
Tap into some of the things that Brother Omar was speaking of. What we're doing today is wonderful, and yes, tomorrow, but really the Southern Baptist Convention meets 2 days out of the year. And I think where life really happens and where some of the relationships, for example, Brother Aaron was speaking of, happens is at the state convention level. And I think the elements of misery loves company, the elements of fellowship, the elements of struggling with something together, it's easier to get your hands around hundreds or maybe 1,000 churches versus like 40,000 churches. And the state convention allows you to tap into the partnerships and things with the North American Mission Board, especially if you're in a non-South state convention. The state convention allows you to tap into partnerships with the International Mission Board, which is one of the greatest reasons for denominationalism. Like, few of your churches could send 5 missionaries around the world. And right now, if you have like 25 members and the Lord calls 5 of them to the mission field, you can send 5 of them around the world with your 25 members, which you couldn't do if you just Lone Ranger, Joe Blow church out there by yourself. And so I think the state convention plugs you into those things. And the last thing I would say is that everything you see in that big room happens based on state convention involvement. These trustee boards of the seminaries, IMB, all those things, those trustee seats are allocated by state. Very few entities have at-large trustees. I just happen to be an at-large ERLC trustee. You don't have at-large trustees, do you? Yeah, so all the trustees are allocated by state. And so the state convention, I think, is really the best way to really enjoy the breadth and the capacity of Southern Baptist ministry. And I think it's the best identity as well. People talk about our name and all those kind of things. I think the state convention is the best contextual identity. I don't walk around talking about I'm a Southern Baptist. I've been a Tennessee Baptist. I've been a Kentucky Baptist. I've been a Maryland, Delaware Baptist. And now, thank the Lord, I'm a Florida Baptist in the sunshine. But it's the most intimate, it's just much more intimate than the national SBC, and it's much more consistent than just kind of the varieties of associational life. When I was in Maryland, I was regular with CBMA because it was one of the more healthy expressions of local association life. And just to be a little history nerd, it was more in line with historic Baptist associations, theological accountability, pastoral sharing, and all those kind of things. We're at a good place of just kind of eliminating duplicity and overlap in Southern Baptist life. And you may have heard someone today mentioning associations doing the NAM report. Associations are still kind of redefining themselves as not trying to be smaller versions of the state convention, as state conventions are not trying to be smaller versions of the mission board. So as we get kind of good flow, the state convention is the sweet spot for connectivity with other pastors in your state and other people in your same ministry context. For an example, in Maryland, Delaware, Baltimore is drastically different, and Washington, D.C. is drastically different than Birmingham and Montgomery in Alabama. And so those state convention relationships, I just think they are vital. And as the world gets more and more hostile to the gospel of Jesus Christ, and the world's always been hostile. We've never been in heaven, so forget that stuff. But as it gets more hostile, the fellowship is just so sweet, and we need one another. I mean, even having moved, when I'm just at a frustrated moment, I'll text Mark, and he'll just ignore the text because he knows I'm just venting, but I will just...
I love you, brother.
State conventions.
All right, thanks, Kevin. One of the things, and then Aaron, I want to hear more about, because you started an association.
No, we revitalized an association, an existing association.
I want to tell people really practically what I do in case you want to rip this off. The CBMA, so I'm sitting there with a legal pad that's blank. Guys walk in, I write down their name and the name of their church, and I say, anything you want to talk about. And then I write that down. Sometimes I'll say no, sometimes I'll have one thing, sometimes I'll have a couple things. And so I'm making that list while the guys are walking in. And then when everybody's there, we'll pray, and I'll just pick one of the things. I'll say, Tom, how's your church going? How's Providence going? And give us an update. And then, Garrett has a question about divorced deacons. Garrett, tell us about it. And then we'll go around and get people's thoughts and comments after Garrett shared. We may pray, and we'll do that for 2 hours. And sometimes we'll get into real long conversations. Other times it'll be a bunch of short ones. But I've certainly found them edifying. Omar, encouraging for you?
Yeah, definitely.
Aaron, tell us about the Association Revitalizing.
Well, when I got to Atlanta, we had the Atlanta Association of Southern Baptist Churches. It was a split off over theological liberalism about probably 25 years ago now. And it had a full-time director of missions that was taking all of the money. And because it had a little budget, associations aren't very large.
Now, when you say taking all of the money,
using all of the money. And this was a part-time position. So the brother had a full-time job. And so eventually, after that person went on by just attrition, we voted to defund the DOM position. And it's now entirely led by local church pastors in the greater Atlanta area. So we take that roughly, $80,000 every year and give away 90% of it in one-time, maybe three-time grants for church planters and church revitalizers. We meet once a month for pastor fellowship that we invite the entire pastoral staff and do similar things like you described. And we have one annual meeting a year so that we can, because we have a budget and it is an official, network. We don't require SBC membership. We don't require Georgia Baptist Church membership. We do require adherence to the Baptist Faith and Message 2000, and then we have a pastor's retreat every year. And that's all we do. We don't do any programs, but when a church does something, we try to put the microphone under the church and say, hey, go to Faith Community, they're doing this biblical counseling event. We stay out of the programming and try to keep it simple because we've all got full-time jobs.
Guys, I want to transition a little bit to SBC and how SBC is helping or not helping you as local church pastors. Let me start with this question in a single word, an unqualified, no asterisks, single word. How would you describe the state of the SBC? Mark, one word. State of the SBC, one word.
mixed.
Danny?
That would be accurate. Mixed, hopeful.
Hopeful. Okay, I'm outlawing mixed and hopeful. Another word. For the rest of you.
Divided.
Divided, okay.
Shaky.
Shaky.
Struggling.
Struggling. Thank you. What's the state of the SBC now versus, let's say, 10 years ago? Better, worse, about the same? Mark, short answers.
And you're literally looking for better or worse?
Whatever you want to say, relative to 10 years ago. But, a sentence or two, not one word, a sentence or two or three.
Danny, I'll sound a little bit different than you. I'm less hopeful. I'm not hopeless, but I'm less hopeful now than I was 10 years ago.
Well, I'll say this. I would have never thought 10 years ago we would be where we are today having the kind of conversations that we're having. And so
Those are good or those are bad conversations?
they're bad.
Okay.
Social media is not our friend. It's a detriment. And people will use that vehicle to say things and act in ways they would never do to your face because they would be too ashamed and too cowardice to do so. And you may punch them in the face for it, which would not be Christ-like, but you still might think about it. But the reason I'm hopeful is Southern Baptists have this unbelievable ability under God's grace, though we never get there in a straight line, never. We usually wind up at the right place. That's true, I believe, when it comes to international missions. I think that's true when it comes to North American church planting. I know it's true when it comes to the 6 seminaries, because I was in seminary in the early 80s, where you could hardly find an inerrantist even at the most conservative of our seminaries. When I went to Southeastern in 1992 as a faculty member, the majority of the faculty, we'll just go down the line, no inerrancy, no exclusivity, pro-choice, sympathetic to homosexual agenda, all egalitarians. Many would not even pray to God as Father because that was patriarchal and oppressive to women. So when people begin to say, like today, well, there's a drift toward liberalism, I'm sorry, that's just nonsense. I've stared liberalism in the face, and it's not what's happening in our seminaries today. All of our faculty confess as inerrantists. And I know some people say, well, they say it, but they don't really mean it. Well, now you're questioning their heart and motives, and that's also sinful and wrong. I take people at their word until they provide incontrovertible evidence that they don't mean what they say. And so you look at our 6 seminaries, they're all healthy, they're all confessional and convictional. And let me say this as part of, back to the why is it, I agree with Aaron 1,000%. We don't need denominations, but that doesn't mean they can't be helpful. And right now, we have a number of wonderful sister evangelical seminaries that are on the verge of shutting their doors. And I'm very, very concerned about that because we need them. We don't need Southern Baptists now training close to 70% of all seminary students in America. That's you say, aren't you grateful for that? No, I'm not. We can do our part, but we need the others. We need their voice. We need their perspective. But here's the deal. I hold out my hand every year, as does Al Moeller and Adam Greenway and Jamie Dew and Jason Allen and Jeff Orge. And Southern Baptists put in our hands somewhere between $6 and $10 million, and we simply say, thank you. And as a result of that, those of you, how many attended a Southern Baptist seminary or attending now? You know the phenomenal deal you got financially because of that. And so, do we need them? No, but can we do more together than we would be able to do by ourselves? Absolutely. So that's why, and I'll stop, I'm willing to roll up my sleeves and put up with the junk and accept the criticisms, because when I get on the mission field or I visit around and see what's happening in terms of North American church planting, I'm willing to do that and endure that so others can go and do what God has called them to do to get the gospel to the unreached peoples all around the world. And we could not do that by ourselves.
One thing quickly on just what Danny said about the seminaries. I've heard pastors say recently, listen, if all we're getting is cheaper tuition, we can take care of that increased tuition cost. So let's just not worry about the cooperative program for the sake of the Southern Baptist seminaries. And I just want to say, knowing a number of guys like Danny who are in positions of authority in seminaries, that we could not recover the cost of a seminary and everything that goes on in the current residential seminaries just through tuition. It would not happen. So the kind of education, residential education we have now, it's either changing, Fuller evaporated, Gordon Conwell is selling its campus. I mean, this is happening all over the place, guys. Trinity's in trouble. I mean, they're just it's happening to all of them. The reason it's not happening with the Southern Baptist ones is the weight of our churches giving. So it actually matters more than just the price of tuition. And yeah.
And just look at the quality of the faculties. Look at their writings. Again, when someone says, well, they're going liberal, they're going woke, my response is talk to the professors, talk to the students that are there, look at what they're writing, and I find that their writings are not only wonderfully evangelical and orthodox, they are right in line with what I would want to receive and give out if I were trying to build a network of healthy churches for fulfilling the Great Commission.
Aaron, what was your word?
Divided.
Okay, and then we had divided and we had shaky. So the brothers are feeling like things are a little rough right now. So now
notice it's the three younger ones who are feeling worse than the two older ones.
Yes, because we went through the war of the conservative resurgence, and I don't want to denigrate what's happening now.
Yeah.
But brothers, this is play school at the nursery compared to the bloodletting that went on in the 1980s and 1990s. Were you in Dallas in 1995? Yeah. 85.
No.
I was with 45,000 messengers, and I'm telling you, you could cut the tension in the air with a knife. Men squared up with each other to duke it out in Jesus' name, of course, and it was brutal. And again, even today, when I got frustrated along with others at the way some people were talking and evidently mistreating some of our pages, you expected that almost every year for a decade, and so I don't like it, but in comparison, this is mild. This is mild.
But Danny, let me just push back on that a little bit. Maybe you and I, given our age, we have more at stake, more we've seen accomplished, more kind of done through the convention. These three brothers may have a longer road ahead of them than we do, and they may be seeing things that we didn't see and having circumstances that cause them to build different structures or use different structures.
I would agree with that 100%. No question about it.
How do the three of you feel like, you can comment on now versus 10 years from ago, or just how do you feel like the SBC is doing in helping you do the work of the ministry that you feel called to do?
I'm going to answer your question. First, our church is in friendly cooperation with and contributing toward the causes of the SBC. So just to be clear, very thankful. I just want to affirm all the things that you said. 10 years ago, this is my perception. My perception from the cheap seats was the SBC is largely run by some folks who have been around a long time, all right? And some of those folks have sort of aged out, retired, fallen out of ministry. And so what I've perceived the past 3 or 4 years has been kind of, sort of, a vacuum of leadership that has been, with the help of social media, been filled in through microphones on the floor and some new other leaders. And what that's brought to the surface has been a stream of confrontationalism to the culture. So a group of the SBC that seems to be leaning and we want to confront the culture. And then another sort of stream that is leaning towards we want to be accommodating to the culture. And then some of us sort of like, I want to be prophetic, but I don't think I want to be confrontational like that. I want to be winsome, but I don't want to accommodate. And I think from the cheap seats, the inability to make headway with regard to a church that ordains female pastors, that seems to be evidence of shakiness, division, and a lack of health.
In some ways, we're just reflecting the larger culture. The problems besetting tribalism and larger culture we're feeling inside the SBC too. Is that kind of what you're saying?
Yes.
Yeah. Matt, you have been Acts 29 for a long time, but you joined the SBC. Your church did what year?
Well, the church was SBC. Like, we were planted in 1978 from
Right.
Lakeland Baptist Church that was planted 40 years before that by First Baptist Church Louisville, that was like Holliford Prairie Church, started by the Southern Baptists when they set out to reach the Mesos Indians, and they settled on the prairie out where we were. So I've tried to track our roots. We're always have been Southern Baptist. And I thought we had a shot 10 years ago, and I'm almost fairly convinced we don't anymore. I thought there was young blood that was eager to serve Jesus and engage this moment of history, and to the man, they were assassinated. Their character slandered, attacked at every turn, like need counseling after they stepped out of their posts. And I just saw my friends brutalized by a kind of demonic wickedness that shouldn't have any place among the people of God. And it's cost me. Like, even with we're here to be prudent. We started moving everything to 829 about 3 years ago. It's just like there's never not significant drama that doesn't seem to have a reasonable take. And I'm not talking about the crazies that get to the mic on the floor, right? That's not what I'm talking about. Like, every family's got that. Like, that's why you're like, okay, now why are we doing open mic with 12,000 people? There was a reason. I mean, at one point, somebody was like, this makes sense. And so they did it. But today, I'm like, who does this?
They're a lot more sophisticated. I mean, the motions that are being made, I would say they're not necessarily crazies. They're convictional and principled,
Absolutely.
and they've done their research, and that's different than 1999.
You think?
I think so.
Yeah.
I'm not commending
I think
it.
I blocked some things out. I think maybe I blocked some things out.
Also, we got this report, whatever you think of Guideposts as the group to do it, we got this report because the floor over against the chair in the executive committee. So the polity kind of worked last year, where they insisted for a thorough investigation.
Yeah. So that's where I sit. Again, I came to my first one at 28. I'll be 48 in 2 weeks. And so I feel older in this now. And I think that has not made me more hopeful. I've had the number of backroom conversations I've had has left me a bit jaded.
Omar?
Yeah, I don't have the kind of long-term knowledge as you guys. Been a member of SBC Church for the last 12 years, pastor of one for the last 3 years, or lead pastor of one for the last 3 years. So not a long history. I say struggling. I think struggling to find what will we care about, right? So I hate sexual abuse. I hate racism in SBC, right? We need to call those things out. And we are doing that, right, in some ways. But it was disconcerting to when Rick Warren comes and basically number boasts and then gets a standing ovation, right? That is kind of insipid wickedness that will rot the thing if we really keep caring all about numbers and nothing else matters, right? So it's struggling to find what will we really care about and what will we prioritize.
Omar, do you have hope that because you're saying, you can only say this and that because you've only been there 3 years as the lead pastor, but I would just say that also gives you some advantages that Danny and I don't have, because you do have a short history, and maybe you see things that could be possible that Danny and I wouldn't even think of.
Maybe.
So maybe there are things that you and your generation are going to be able to do that once you're kind of rid of us.
Well, and I would say that I just want to thank you because I've been coming now for 20 years because you keep saying, show up, you got to show up. And so I keep showing up, and here I am.
And I do notice you're grayer than when you first started coming 20 years ago.
But I mean, God brings dead things to life. And your example and your rebukes over the years have been meaningful. And so I'm not planning on leading the church to leave the SBC. I'm praying for a kind of revitalization. I don't know if that's an offensive thing to say, but a revitalization. And as Christians, we have to be hopeful, but and yet I'm still convinced it's not fundamentally necessary. And that helps me be more hopeful, because the less weight I put on it, the more hopeful I can be, because I'm just not expecting as much out of it as maybe some others are.
Now, Mark, you remember several times before this conversation, we agreed I'd ask questions because you wanted to answer them. I love the fact that you love to ask questions. That's great. But can I get you to answer this question about now versus 10 years ago? And how are you feeling about the trajectory? Do you have hope? No? Less? More?
I'm kind of where Matt is. Maybe not quite as dark as him, but I mean, I think I have a lot of the same conversations, and there's definitely some of the same kind of disappointments. But again, I don't know if this is just personality. I can't help but see just a lot of good things. On either side of you are Aaron and Omar, and I know scores of pastors like that, and that just gives me hope. And honestly, it's not just a throwaway line. I think that they might see things because of their lack of history that I wouldn't think of seeing. And so because as Aaron says so theologically correctly, this is not necessary. We don't have to do this. That gives the ability to be creative with this in a way I don't think you would be with a local church. I mean, a local church, we got a lot of stuff given by the Lord, in the Word. We need to do this, we need to do this, and praise the Lord we do. That's wonderful. But with this thing, we can kind of do whatever we think, is consistent with Scripture and helps us pastor local churches. So I'm kind of excited to see what might happen that's good.
It's 45 after. You want to transition at some point to ask? I want to ask Danny one more question, but think about whether you want to do that. As an entity head, what do you feel like the entity heads on the whole and the institutions on the whole? You're hearing some of the, we're frustrated here. What would you say the entity heads on the whole are doing well at the moment, and where are areas for improvement in light of some of this conversation?
You are not the longest serving, but you are the oldest entity head, aren't you? That is correct. Come on, let's hear it.
Thank you.
Hey, wisdom to honor to whom honor is due, brother.
Okay. I'll take that. I'll take that.
Danny, I've watched you operate for 30 plus years, and you've operated with integrity. You've operated with joy, with honoring people, trying to include. Yes. So I have not always agreed with you, but I have often agreed with you. And I've always appreciated your spirit and what you're trying to get done. We're going to be in front of the Lord soon. Let's do the best we can.
Well, obviously, we agree on a lot more than we would disagree on, because we did 9Marks for 9 years and COVID stopped us, and now we're starting it back.
Picking it up again.
Yes.
We did it in our 60s. Let's do it in our 70s.
Absolutely. Well,
There we
I won't make that one, but that's all right. And we're very close with the Pillar Network. So though we
that's another connection we haven't even mentioned here tonight.
So we cooperate and work with others, but we have a real strong identity, I think, in that regard. And I rejoice in that, because I think it makes us stronger. It allows people to speak into our school, because I believe, I've said this many times, my parents' generation were loyal to a fault. My generation was loyal, but we asked a lot of questions. The younger generation is not very loyal to anything. But if we demonstrate to you that this is worth giving yourself to, you give yourself with 10,000 times more passion and zeal than any generation I've seen. So that makes me hopeful and optimistic, because I think you have a passion for Christ, the gospel, the word, that my generation gave lip service to, but did not really embrace with their whole heart. Now, that then places it upon me and the others a responsibility to show you why it is worth investing in us, worth coming to our school, worth sending your kids to our school, believing that we will help you do better in your ministry. And I want to again reaffirm what Aaron said. We're not necessary, but we could never and should never try to take the place of the local church. But we can do some things more easily than can a local church in terms of doing theological education. It would be hard, even if you're part of a very large church, to provide quality Greek, Hebrew, ethics, philosophy, theology, church history, Baptist history, evangelism, pastoral ministries, preaching, and so on. But I'm also convinced that the best theological education takes place in partnerships with seminaries and local churches, because though there's some things we can do more easily, there's some things that you brothers will never learn except inside the refining fire of a local church. And therefore, I don't want to ever try to do what we're not, a lot of times we're saying, seminary didn't teach me that. Well, brothers, there's some things we just can't teach you. We're not set up to do that, but a local church is. And that's why, again, I see us as servants to local churches. And if we ever lose that calling and vision, then we really forfeit our right to exist altogether.